This is Kevin Conroy, the voice of Batman. And you're listening to the DCAU Review, hosted by Cal and Liam, streaming at DCAUreview.com and on your favorite podcast app.
Get charged up for action that'll shock your system.
Tell me that's not cool.
An unstoppable superhero and his crew embark on impossible missions and will bring mutated villains to justice.
When Static's in the house, bad guys better step off.
Pull the plug on crime with the adventures of Static Shock. Yeah!
Welcome, everybody, to episode 319 of the DCAU Review. I am one of your hosts, Cal, along with me, as he always is, my good brother, Liam. We are continuing here with a month of Static Shock reviews, and as we discussed with last week's finale, we have officially moved out of the original style animation. We're all done with those episodes, so from here on out, it's a high-grade animation only. Got rid of the old costume. Static's in the new, more svelte-looking, sleek-looking black shirt with the yellow logo on it. And we have a fun one to discuss today with you today on episode 319 of the program.
That is right, and it's funny, we're just about out of season 3 episodes in general, white or black shirt Static, notwithstanding. So here we are today with the what ended up being the season finale for season 3 of Static, that being the episode "Blast from the Past." This is a well, we'll get to it. It's an episode of Static meeting a superhero from the yesteryears, and a little bit of a styles clash, to say the least. So we'll get into that as we always do here.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm looking forward to discussing this one with you and seeing if our opinions line up, as they so often do. But of course, before we get into our official synopsis for this episode, we have to get to the official IMDb synopsis for this episode, which originally debuted here in the United States on June the 21st, 2003, meaning we're just about a month removed at original air date here from this episode's 21-year anniversary. And of course, before we get into the official IMDb synopsis for this week's episode, we will of course remind you that it is brought to you by, as it is each and every week, the Pod Tower. Head over to youtube.com/the Pod Tower today and subscribe, and you'll get several ongoing podcasts, including ours truly, and all in one streaming convenient location for you on the YouTube platform. You get our podcast library, every single episode we've done thus far, and bonus episodes, all available for you. And in addition to that, you get ongoing podcasts from the folks at Watchtower Database and the entire Tim Talk podcast catalog, all in one convenient streaming location. Head over to youtube.com/the Pod Tower today and subscribe.
That's right. So this is the synopsis for Blast from the Past, which is written by Adam Beechin and John Semper Jr., directed by ? Because this is another theme of Static season 3 episodes, is that there's quite a few that just don't have a director credited for whatever reason. Music by Richard Wolf and animation by Dong Wu, and that synopsis reads as such. Soul Power, a hero from the 1960s, calls on Static. This is written for them. There's a lot of commas in it for some reason. Soul Power, a hero from the 1960s, calls on Static for help when Dakota is threatened by his old enemy, Professor Menace.
I mean, maybe structurally it could use some work. It's not awful, but it's probably a D+ or a C- in the grand scheme of things. There's a lot more to it than what's there, but it's not the worst that we've had as when it comes to our IMDb synopses. But we'll try to make up for the lack of clarity with our own synopsis, Liam, as we get into the episode. As we kick things off with Virgil reading a comic book to a pair of elderly gentlemen that are sitting in a nursing home or a retirement home, and we have Static spending time here in this retirement home. We learn that he has told Sharon that he would help her in volunteering at the retirement home, but very quickly, in the midst of reading this comic book to these two gentlemen who are very enthusiastic about it and requesting that he add a little bit more excitement and funk to his delivery of the comic book, and maybe an inappropriate comment about women made by one of the elderly guests, Static is desperate to leave.
Dennis, I'm this close to giving you a knuckle sandwich. Just keep reading, Sparky, and give it some 60s groove. You kids today have no sense of style. Back in my day,
not again.
Cars were faster, threads were finer, and the girls were foxy. Mm-hmm.
That's it. Lunch break.
Hey, you're not done with Soul Power.
Trust me, I'm done with Soul Power.
Stay tuned for weather and sports after these messages.
Sharon, you gotta let me go home, please.
What's wrong now?
It's Mr. Grant. He's making me crazy.
Virgil, you said you'd come here to the retirement home to help me. Now you want to leave me short-handed. What kind of help is that?
But
This is community service, Virgil. It's your duty as a citizen. Besides, you could learn a few things from the older generation.
Like what? How to annoy people?
We interrupt this broadcast for a special report. A major crime is in progress at the Dakota Museum of Technology.
And just as he's begging Sharon to allow him to get off the hook when it comes to his volunteer role, she's a little less enthusiastic about letting him leave, but they are interrupted by a news report showing that there is a rampage of robots on downtown Dakota. And at this point, Virgil makes his way out up to the top of the roof and begins to do his transformation. But just as he's about to fly off, the elderly gentleman, Mr. Grant, interrupts him and catches him in the act of changing into his costume. We get a bit of a cliffhanger into our opening credits, and then we come back and Virgil is desperately trying to come up with an excuse as to why he's wearing the costume, but Mr. Grant tries to put him at ease very early on, letting him know that he had figured out that he was Static a while ago, and that Mr. Grant not only admits to Static that he knows that Virgil has a secret, but he admits his own secret, and that is he himself is a former superhero, the same superhero that they were just reading the comic book about, Soul Power.
I knew you were Static when I first met you.
What, you did?
Yep. I can feel the electrical field around you.
Whoa, how'd you do that?
Because I have a secret identity, too. This'll help you recognize me.
You're the Lone Ranger?
No, boy, it's me, Soul Power.
What?
And you're going to take me with you to that museum.
Whoa, man, are you tripping? Why would I do a whack thing like that?
Because if you don't, I'll tell all my friends I met a real superhero today, Virgil Hawkins.
No way. You can't blackmail me. You're not going, and that's fine.
At this point, Mr. Grant says that he's going to redon his Soul Power identity, and he's going to go help Static. Static laughs about it, says he's much too old, can't accept that help. But it's there where Mr. Grant decides he's going to blackmail Static and say, well, if you don't let me help you, I'm going to tell everybody that Virgil Hawkins is Static Shock or is Static. And that's where we kick things off here with Static and Soul Power together, headed into battle to try and stop these two robots, or this army of robots that are rampaging in downtown Dakota. The entire way, Static is pretty much griping and complaining that Soul Power is far too old. We see that Soul Power doesn't quite have his legs under him, but we do learn a little bit about his power set as we learn how he got his powers, which came from a transformer at the Hoover Dam exploding, and gave him the power of 10 turbines through that explosion.
Not to be confused with the power of Tom Turbine.
Right, which would have been interesting, but yes, just 10 turbines, not Tom, as you mentioned.
Please don't call me Sparky. Hey, how'd you get to be a superhero anyway?
It all started in the early 60s. I was just a normal cat until I got in the way of some thugs that wanted to trash Hoover Dam. transformer glue giving me the power of 10 turbines. I fought all sorts of scum in my day, but the worst of them all was my arch enemy, Professor Menace.
It's interesting. Static gives him his own static saucer to fly on, but he says he's much more comfortable riding the power lines. This whole sort of age dichotomy, as I mentioned, is sort of the theme of the episode. Static continues to chide him for being potentially too old to help out and washed up. Meanwhile, Soul Power continues to call Static Sparky over and over again, as we'll learn a little bit later, just the meaning. But Static doesn't appreciate it. Seems to feel like it's a demeaning comment towards him. They finally arrive on the scene at where the robots are, and we see that Static is quick to jump into battle and engage them, despite Soul Power's pleas with him not to. And it's because that Soul Power knows exactly the strength and weaknesses of these robots, which seem to absorb the power. They absorb Static's powers and shoot him back at him. Static is able to, after an initial hiccup there, is able to overcome them by throwing some cars on top of them. But just when you thought it was over, the most giantest robot you've ever seen shows up and grabs Static in its hand and begins to drain Static's powers. And that's when it's time for Soul Power to swing into action. We get our first little bit here that shows that Soul Power may in fact not be too old for this ish.
That's right. So Soul Power saves the day at the last minute, right before Static is about to go splat. He saves the day, but is a little bit overmatched himself, and it becomes evident here through. This is such a great old comic book villain thing where the robot has a television on its chest suddenly. And here's where we get the reveal that yes, in fact, as Soul Power had surmised on their way to the crime scene, that it is none other than the nefarious Professor Menace behind all of this. And he, as he sort of takes down both Static and Soul Power, he tells them he could kill them both right here, but that he has other plans for them. And instead, he just escapes. His robots escape with their ill-gotten gains, which are microchips and some light bulbs, and some other vague technology things. And they make it off, and they're both a little worse for wear. And Static is pretty sure he's had his fill of this Soul Power character. Wants to kind of go it alone going forward. We go back to the Hawkins residence where Virgil's dad has gotten out like an old camcorder and is, I guess, it's one of these things where so Soul Power was an actual superhero. But also there's like a ton of like movies and comic books about him. So he's also kind of like an old like movie serial hero. It's interesting. I guess this could be like news footage, but it looks pretty high resolution for news footage from the 70s. But
and we know that there are comic books also about him, right?
Right, because Virgil's reading one at the start of the episode, as you mentioned.
Yeah, so everything indicates that he was both a pop culture phenomenon, but also a legitimate superhero as well.
Yeah, that's interesting. I guess it's kind of I guess they do that more modernly since the first movie, but that's kind of how they do Captain America now, right? He was like a mascot and actually going into battle and fighting the Germans at the same time. So I guess that's kind of what Soul Power was as well. But Virgil's dad is just tickled to death to get to share his love of Soul Power. Calls him the Static of his day.
See how great he was. And after he'd defeat a villain, he'd do his funky Soul Power dance. Soul Power. Soul Power.
Pops, do not dance.
Soul Power was a real hero, all right. I had all his comic books until my mother made me throw them away. Oh, the money I could have made.
Yo, I just asked you what you knew about him. I didn't realize you were a super fanboy.
People forget that he was the Static of his day. Maybe even better.
I don't think so.
I remember one time...
I got it.
Which really kind of rubs Virgil a little bit the wrong way, but as Virgil is kind of lamenting, hoping that he's seen the last of Soul Power. He gets a knock on the door, and it's none other than Soul Power's alter ego in like, I guess this is more of a visual gag, but he's dressed like how superheroes used to dress when they were in costume. He's wearing like a full suit and a trench coat and a like fedora. And he's just like, hello, I was walking through the neighborhood and I was hoping I could take Virgil here under my wing and discuss some things. And like the most conspicuous man you've ever seen, but somehow Mr. Hawkins doesn't really pick up on that. And so he sends Virgil off, hoping that Mr. Grant can teach Virgil a few things and keep him out of trouble. So they decide that they're going to go meet with an old associate of Mr. Grant's and try to get some information about what Professor Menace is planning. On the way, they have Chekhov's conversation about a former sidekick.
Mm-hmm. Don't forget that he shows them the spark pad also in the midst of this, which is Soul Power's old. That's where that conversation about the old sidekick occurs.
That's right. They go to the power pad.
Yeah, that's right.
And they discuss some things. Yes, here's where we learned Soul Power had a sidekick named Sparky, who was a part of his team as well back in the day. They realize they need to go meet with someone, an old associate of Soul Power's, that being Philip Rollins, who is vaguely high up in the national security, Homeland Security. It's not really clear, but he asks him for help in locating Professor Menace. Mr. Rollins, a little bit uncooperative, not really wanting to help. He pulls out the security card, says, he has to play by the rules. There's kind of an interesting back and forth where Soul Power is kind of arguing with him, talking about, I fought so that men like you would have a chance to be in positions like this, and now you won't help me. But he kind of throws it back at him, telling him that Soul Power also taught them to play within the rules and don't break the law. So he's not going to help Soul Power. But as they're leaving, it's by the way, they're in an old Cadillac now. They're in the Soulmobile.
The Soulmobile.
They're driving by, and as they're driving away, we learn that Soul Power actually lifted the security card using his the old static cling. The old static cling. He's able to grab the card, and so they head off once again to try to look for this. They use the security clearance, which is just a card. You just put it into a machine, and it just gives you all the satellite information in the United States, apparently. So, so he puts that into their computer, and as they quickly discover, there's a quite a bit of energy spiking in the mountains. There's mountains outside of Dakota. Do we know that?
No, I don't think so. I mean,
I guess
no.
Dakota has always felt a little bit more like Midwesty to me. So
For sure.
So maybe this feels less jarring than when there's a desert outside of Gotham City, admittedly.
Agreed.
But yes, there are mountains, and as they fly in to try to see what exactly is going on with this machine Professor Menace is building. As they begin to arrive, they catch themselves in the middle of a snowstorm and discover that is what else would a 1970s over the top pulp villain want to do? He wants a magic weather machine to take over the world.
Well, of course he would. Yes, as they investigate the magic weather machine, unfortunately, I think it's the line of the month, Liam. It's a trap. The magic weather machine is, in fact, was a trap the entire time. We find out that Professor Menace was intentionally luring Soul Power and Static there in order to trap them so that he could further siphon some of their powers off to then power his machine. That this would give him enough power to then force this weather change across all of Dakota and perhaps the entire world. So it's then they're in the midst of this unfortunate event that Chekhov's old-timey contraption that they took from the power pad or what's it called? Is it the power pad? Is that the name
Power
of the
pad, yes.
Yeah, the power pad. As they were in the power pad, Soul Power gave Static this old piece of machinery weapon that they weren't sure was going to be useful. But of course, in this moment, it was useful to disable one of the robot arms. But at this point, it seems like neither men have enough power to completely do anything at this point. It feels like the machine is going to do exactly what it needs to do, and they're without hope. But wouldn't you know, stepping into the machine at that point with both Soul Power and Static happens to be Philip Rollins, who, if you were paying attention at all, you could pretty much figure out. He reveals that he was once Soul Power's sidekick, Sparky.
Soul Power, are you okay?
Maybe I am too old for this. Thanks to me, Dakota's doomed.
Gotta get back to the city.
How? I don't have enough power left to fly. I can barely walk.
Maybe I can help.
Mr. Rollins, what are you doing here?
Menace has taken over my satellites. He's using them to control the weather.
How'd he manage to do that?
He pretended to be one of my government defense clients. We gave him top-level access. And boom! So much for security.
But how did you find us?
I still have our old tracers, partner.
Just like old times, eh?
Whoa! You're Sparky!
That's right. My old costume stretches enough to still fit. You guys ready for a recharge?
You bet. Get ready, world, because it's time for a little Soul Power!
And he reveals that his costume still fits, and he reveals that he too has electricity powers that we learn shortly thereafter come from his suit that he invented. But with being able to help Static and Soul Power power back up through the power of his suit, they're able to destroy the weapon at that point. And at this point, our heroes are just determined to try and figure out where Professor Menace may be located. Thankfully, Sparky / Mr.
we get this reveal. I'm sorry to interrupt you.
Yeah.
Where Sparky, as we mentioned, he works for some sort of security. He has some sort of security clearance with the government. He's relatively high up.
Right.
And as it turns out, Professor Menace just pretended to be somebody that has government clearance. And so Sparky just gave him everything. He just gave him all of their, just let him into their computers, let him have all this information of how to build these machines and control their satellites and all this crazy stuff.
Which is hilarious, obviously, because the interaction between Rollins and Static and Soul Power, where he wouldn't allow Soul Power access, even though they were old friends, because that wasn't the right thing to do. So yes, very much like campy, in the vein of Batman 66 idea that this guy was just, he was unwilling to compromise his morals to give Soul Power the information to use for good, but he so willingly and gullibly believed that this supervillain was just somebody that should have access to this stuff. So that is quite funny. But they trace the location back to the retirement home where we all started things, and they go down to the basement of the retirement home and break through a wall. And then, of course, there with a pair of additional robots sits Professor Menace. Soul Power attempts to engage first, but is knocked down initially. Static and Sparky jump into action and begin trying to take down the robots, which they are successfully able to do. Soul Power says that since this is his old villain, he wants to take on Professor Menace on his own. So Static and Sparky team up using their power to give Soul Power even more power to overpower Professor Menace, knocking him out in the end. And then it is revealed that despite his youthful-looking age and the story that he cryogenically froze himself for decades prior to his dethawing, and then using modern technology, it turns out that Professor Menace is not young still. He was lying. He's in fact a fellow tenant of the retirement home that we saw in the very first scene that was openly rooting against Soul Power while Virgil was reading the stories. So we have come full circle here with our reveal of our villain.
Give up Soul Power. You're too old.
You're never too old to fight for justice, lame brain.
Hear that, Menace? These kids today are pretty smart.
You thinking what I'm thinking?
Right on.
Look, it was all a holographic illusion. He really is old, like me. Dennis.
All these years I've waited and planned my revenge, and now you've still won. I should have stuck to basket weaving. Oh.
Yeah, and that's where we kind of wrap things off. We see Virgil going and visiting Mr. Grant at the retirement home, who says that Soul Power is officially retired at this point, now that he's wrapped up his last supervillain case. And Virgil thanks Mr. Grant for not only teaching him a few things, but giving him a really, really fun experience. And Mr. Grant tells him that he enjoys passing on knowledge, and Virgil asks him, well, if that's the case, then why haven't you taught me the Soul Power dance? And the two of them dance together, wrapping things up with a very 1960s, almost 70s dance, I'd say, to end the episode. So, Liam, I love this episode. It's
a joy.
It's so fun. Like, from start to finish, it doesn't take itself too seriously. It's clearly paying homage to a lot of different things, as we'll talk about visually. But I think specifically you mentioned it when we talked about doing this episode last week. It certainly acknowledges some of the blaxploitation media from the 60s and 70s that existed. It certainly somewhat pays homage to Black Lightning. We know that the original idea for the episode was Soul Power was to be Black Lightning, but they didn't want to, I think, pay the original creator of Black Lightning to
Black
use.
Lightning's, yeah, he's one of those characters that has there's long periods in between when he pops up in like other media for whatever reason. Well, famously was never part of JLU, like or any of those, like, where you would think a guy like him would be a big part of it. The Super Friends show famously replaced him with Black Vulcan, who was a character who actually Static dresses up as him in the pilot episode.
That's right. Yeah,
there's a little connection there, but yeah, there's been weird rules about Black Lightning being on TV for a long time for whatever reason, until I guess more recently when he had the live action show a couple of years ago. But before that, it was few and far between for Black Lightning in non-comic book media.
Superhero rights are like, I feel like there should be a documentary made just about the ins and outs of some of the crazy things that have happened. I mean, I'm sure I remember watching a documentary as a kid, like, that talked a little bit about Fawcett Comics and Captain Marvel and all that stuff, but like, it's far more than just that. There's so many weird things that they weren't allowed to make action figures of, or you make toys of, and which is weird because they own the rights, like DC owns the rights to in some form or fashion to these, but they don't want to pay royalties to certain people. It's very, very strange. But anyway, off my soapbox. Back to the episode itself. It's fun. It doesn't take itself too seriously. It's sort of a roller coaster to find out, who the arch villain is. How could this guy still be so young and not be one of the people that we've already seen? How, is Static gonna get the respect from the older, wiser hero here that he feels like he deserves? Is he going to acknowledge and give the respect to the older, wiser hero that came before him? So there's some tension there that's created between the two of them, but I love that you can kind of see Static going like the growth is occurring within the episode. Like you can see the transformation. That the only critique that I have is that he's like, after that initial battle with the robots, he's like, I'm not working with you at all. And then Mr. Grant shows up to his house the next day and doesn't really have to do much to convince Virgil to continue working with him. He's just like, hey, I need you to help me with something. And even though Virgil tries to get out of it, he's just like, all right, I guess I have to. But I guess you could also explain that away as the growth is happening. But even when he gets to the power pad and he's kind of making fun of that, and then he sees the car and realizes how cool the car is and the computers, and then he kind of begins to understand why Soul Power continues to call him Sparky, and the relationship that he had as a mentor to Sparky. It's really fun. I think it's probably one of if not the best episodes to date that we've covered. I know Static in Africa was a favorite of ours as well, and that obviously there are some similarities. Obviously, with Static working with another hero in that I struggle to. I'm like, man, I don't want to keep giving great ratings just to the ones where Static works with other heroes, but I just think that it works really well for this particular episode. So I felt like I had no choice based on my enjoyment and honestly the start to finish fun that I had of the episode, all of the homages, all of the tributes paid in the show. I went with a perfect 10 out of 10 for my score.
Love it. Yeah, I went with a 9 out of 10, so I'm right in the same ballpark there. Yeah, this is really just like I said, a joy. I think it's interesting. Soul Power almost kind of feels like Static Shock if they're like by way of the Adam West Batman show or something. Like
precisely. Yep.
Like he's like it's and the joke is not look how silly this is. The joke is look how he says it with a straight face over and over again. Like look how right Professor Menace is the bad guy. Dennis the Menace is the bad guy. His real name is Dennis. It could be very ridiculous, but because a lot of the comedy comes from how like straight they play it, and it does very well. And even there's even kind of a bit which I think is something that I think about a lot when comparing comics of a different era to now. People will also kind of laugh and poke fun at the campiness and the silliness of comics. There's that moment where they're in the power pad and Static's making fun of the name, and Soul Power goes, well, where do you hang out? And he says the abandoned gas station of solitude, and he like gets embarrassed as he's saying it. And Soul Power's like, oh yeah, that's way better. It's like, yeah, there's some inherent silliness in all of these stories, even ones that are told in the modern day. Even as storytelling in comics and superheroes has maybe gotten more sophisticated over the last couple of decades, it's still, at the end of the day, there's still a lot of this stuff that you could just kind of poke at and be like, yeah, this is quite silly.
Yeah,
I had a lot of fun with that doing the generational clash, but not doing it in a argumentative fashion.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think that reflects directly in our two high scores. I think, it's just from start to finish, it's a fun episode that I felt myself smiling, enjoying. I mean, your Batman 66 homage, we'll talk about a little bit here and as far as visuals are concerned, but there was much of that felt like you're paying tribute to a particular era and a particular style of media, but in this type of under a different sort of lens, like under a different cultural lens. So yeah, I think it's pretty awesome. It's clearly, I mean, based on our scores, it reflected directly there. All right, Liam, let's move on to our next category, which is animation and visuals, which this week's animation and visuals were done by Dong Wu Animation. And we got a lot of stuff to talk about here as far as the episode is concerned. Obviously we can talk in just, I guess we can start with Soul Power's look, which I feel like it's a little bit of a mashup of a couple different things. We talked a little bit about some Black Lightning homages going on there. The colors remind me a little bit of Alan Scott Green Lantern with green and red and the
Yes.
big collar and he's got like the classic Captain America or Captain Marvel or whoever, like boots with the pirate boots with the foldovers on it. So very much a 60s superhero. He's got the big gold chain, which feels on spot for like a 1960s black superhero, with this gigantic, lightning pendant on it. And I think whether it's in the modern times that we see him in color with the bald head or the flashbacks that we get two different style flashbacks, by the way, which we'll talk about in a second. But as far as the character model, I like the way that he looks. They made him look a little bit, I mean, he's old, obviously he's older, he's got the white hair, he's balding, but it doesn't feel completely, it doesn't feel like, old man Bruce Wayne out here like flying around on a static saucer, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he's still pretty spry for a guy his age.
Yeah, some of that could be, he's a metahuman, so that kind of makes sense. You want to talk about the we get two different flashbacks, as we mentioned. We get one that's strictly just static images, pun intended, static images that are sort of painted, almost comic book frames, maybe even maybe homages to those old Batman 66 trading cards that were just sort of like paintings. These are black and white versus colors, but there's a pretty famous set of 1960s Batman trading cards that are like paintings of what were supposed to be Adam West and Burt Ward's Batman and Robin. But and then we get an actual black and white sequence between Professor Menace and Soul Power. I liked both of those, but I kind of liked the still images. I thought those were was a kind of a unique storytelling device.
Yeah, it's interesting because, as you mentioned, later on we just kind of see like regular old black and white. It's still black and white, but it's just regular footage of him stopping a crime in the street and doing his dance, and then we get a flashback to like his last fight with Professor Menace, where it's just they're fighting in a laboratory and then it blows up and he gets away. But yeah, those first couple bits when he's telling Static his origin story, and then when he's talking about first meeting Professor Menace, I thought those were really striking and a fun bit of I don't know, a point of difference than just doing. Like the black and white stuff they do is fine, but it's not particularly exciting in the way that I thought it really stood out to do those really kind of carefully crafted. Looks almost like you're drawing with like a graphite pencil or something. Like it's real. It's a really, really neat way to illustrate those flashbacks, I thought. So I kind of wish they kept doing those, but. Overall, I think that's the flashback stuff at the beginning certainly stands out. I like Sparky's suit too. I don't know where he's hiding the device that
must be built into the suit.
I guess so, because it's spandex. He points
like
that out.
Yeah, that's true. Hardwired. Maybe it's in the belt. I don't know.
Yeah, but yeah, it's I like the Sparky outfit too. I think that's probably also taking from various Black Lightning and other lightning based superhero looks. But I really like the sequence once they all join together and they make everybody's lightning a different color. So Static's is kind of that like purplish color, purplish white, and then Soul Powers is green, as you mentioned, and then Sparky's is sort of a brighter blue color. And so there's a moment where they're kind of regrouping, and Soul Power's been down on his luck, but they're regrouping now. Sparky's here, and they're ready to go after Professor Menace. They all say it's time for a little Soul Power, and they all stick their hands in the air, and the three different colored light kind of shoots into the air, and then they use that to form into a transition, and it kind of wipes across the screen, and then we cut to them. They blow the roof off of the lab and then go flying out in this big like green orb of energy as they fly away.
Yeah, that was one I had noted as well. speaking of homages, also all over the place with Batman 66 homages here, but when they get to the power pad, the computer setup is completely the Batcave from the Batman 66 run, complete with like the reel to reel. It looks like two old film reels essentially, where the computers, and then he plugs in the information for trying to figure out what Professor Menace's plot is, and it spits out this long sort of piece of tape, which was also an image gag from Batman 66. Also, I think we also saw it maybe in the modern day Batcave in Batman the Animated Series at one point, where one of the computers would spit out a long piece of tape like that too. So Batman homages all over the place here, but the Soulmobile also being like the finned Cadillac style, very similar to the Batman 66 Batmobile. I thought that looked cool. I think it was interesting how they introduced it. It's under this big tarp and they pull it out, and Static at first you think he's just going to be blown away by it, and he goes, "Wow, can this hunk of junk even run?" Which is like you get a little bit of a twist there, and then of course the next scene is them driving, and it's interesting they did the backgrounds, I guess, to it seems to be going at a normal speed, but the backgrounds as they're driving, instead of just doing normal like cityscape repeats passing, it's these bright like green and red and blurred colors that kind of go past them, which kind of give it sort of this trippy little feel, which feels right for if this car is from the 60s. Trippy is where that was the 60s invented trippy, so that feels spot on there. Yeah, I think the robots in each scene, I like that initially we get like this mini army of robots and they all look the same, but then each subsequent robot that's introduced is different. So we get like the big boss robot that has the TV in his chest in that opening scene is just, he's kind of big and dumpy and like barrel chested and big goofy looking head. And then when we get to the finale, one of them sort of resembles a ape or primate of some kind, in the way that it gets up. It kind of puts its front hands down and then sits up. And then the other one is just kind of a more traditional looking robot. But I love what Static and Sparky have to team up, as we said, to kind of defeat the robots as Soul Power goes after the professor. They use their electricity powers to kind of spin him around, and that kind of like unscrews the top of the robot's head. I liked that sequence as well. I thought the interior of both the weather weapon as well as Professor Menace's laboratory fit well, because they have the sort of like the Tesla bulbs, and it very much looks like, as you mentioned, like what a sci-fi cartoon or something from the 60s would depict or a comic book even, would depict a supervillain's lair to look like, with all these random coils and, as I said, Tesla bulbs and all these things that are kind of around and seem to have no function, but are sitting on top of random computers and things. So I thought that the settings themselves also looked pretty strong, and enjoyed those as well. But yeah, I think the overall look of the episode, as we mentioned, we're fully in season 3 at this point. We've got the newer style animation. It's such an upgrade to make everything look great. And it just makes it a whole lot better and more enjoyable. And everybody looked on model, I think, for the majority of the episode. As we talked about, lots of stuff to enjoy and kind of catching your eye, and probably things that we missed as far as homages are concerned. But all those things combined gave me a pretty strong score of 8 out of 10. What about you?
Yeah, I actually went with the same exact score of 8 out of 10 here. Yeah, I think it's really, really fun. Like I said, just the color coded energy blasts are a lot of fun. I definitely agree with you. The different robots are a lot of fun, and feel very, very retro to that era of comics, or even going back to like the 40s. Which, if you think about it, like speaking of all the Adam West stuff, like the Adam West stuff, even though it took place in the 60s, that was really more of a take off of the old like 40s and 50s like Dick Sprang era of Batman and Robin than it was what was currently happening in the comics, especially the later half of that decade when, you know, Denny O'Neil and Neil Adams are kind of working their magic. But so it almost feels like that, even though this character is from the 60s, he also feels like he's kind of a take on a lot of like golden age superhero tropes as well. And even the Professor Menace design with this, he's just in a lab coat and he has a little domino mask. Like that's like a 40s supervillain to a T. Like that's
for sure.
They did not always have the most creative looking outfits or the most over the top outfits. But yeah, just a lot of great stuff. Like you said, some of the little scene transitions with the Static logo doing the spin, like the old 60s Batman. Really fun stuff. All the other homages we've talked about as well. Just a hoot. And really fun one. Really enjoyed the visual of them skating on the power lines as well as a way to get an alternate way to get around from the Static shop. Saucer is pretty cool.
Yeah, I enjoyed that too. Backtracking just for a second, I think putting it together also with the way that things look, robots having the villain, there has to be some Fleischer Superman as in the DNA here too, probably, as that also feels on brand for a DCAU cartoon here. So in case you thought we wouldn't mention it, Fleischer Superman probably also a some sort of direct influence here in the visuals here. All right, Liam, let's move on to our next category, which is going to be music. And Richard Wolf responsible for our music this week, as he is seemingly each and every week that we review Static. But boy, back with a vengeance. Last week we had no Cal's rhyme time, no ability, and this week there's only one rap song to talk about. But there is plenty of fantastic music in this episode. And obviously it wouldn't be a true homage to a 60s, not only a 60s superhero, but a 60s black superhero as well, without having the musical stylings of that time. So we have a lot of horns, a lot of what sound like traditional, what you would see on a 60s superhero, whether it's Batman 66 or the Green Hornet or other media of that time, maybe a little bit of Shaft. You get a lot
real funky bass lines for the whole episode.
Bass lines and horns play a huge role. We get some good voiceovers that we'll discuss here in a second. I thought that the reveal of the Soulmobile, we get just a straight up like horns that wouldn't be out of place from a Batman 66 soundtrack. Really enjoyed that. I think the introduction of Soul Power, of course, he gets his own theme, which is Soul Power Gonna Sock It To You, which we'll cover here in a second. But lots of really fun, like appropriate music for what they're going for with the feel here. And I chuckled a couple of times. I made sure I got the lyrics to our two main songs written down here. But those were like this I think could be classified as a home run as far as music is concerned, because it fits the episode incredibly well.
Yeah, it's pretty picture perfect. We still get, as you mentioned, we get a little bit of the what you might expect from a rank and file Static episode, but a lot of it appropriate for what we're doing here just has this really kind of retro funk appeal to it, and we'll get to the lyrics in a moment. But yeah, it plays to the episode well. We think about certain episodes having like their own little genre episodes, going back to something like The Forgotten or something like that in Batman the Animated Series, where you just or The Main Man and Superman, where you just introduce something that's kind of far into the show, but it works because we have this special episode. And so it fits really well. It fits perfectly for this sort of swinging funky 60s superhero that we got going on here.
For sure. So a little bit of Cal's rhyme time we got here. So the lyrics for the one song, so I think it's during the when Static is and Soul Power are trying to take down the weather machine. I think it's in that scene we get the first rap song, and it goes hit the wall. So these are transcribed directly from closed caption, so it's a little bit hard to hear for the episode because there's a lot of sound effects over top of it. So this is transcribed directly from closed captioning. So if it's wrong, send us a tweet and correct us. But hit the wall. He's a strike. Great wizard. He's the best. Yo, yo, it ain't easy. Get this. Go, homie. It ain't easy. Come on, son. Get this. Come on, homie. Go, homie. Get this. Hit the wall. Get this. So that's our rap song for the episode, which is more traditional static music that I'd say than the rest of the soundtrack seemingly is. But Soul Power's theme song, which, as I mentioned, we get a little bit of taste of it initially, but then we get a full multiple verses at the end when he's doing his battle with Professor Menace, and it goes, "Gonna prove that right on, the power of soul. Gonna move ya, oh yeah, the funkified force. Gonna prove that it's right on, the power of soul. Gonna move ya, oh yeah, the funkified force. Can you feel it? Soul power. Gonna get it. It's so hip now. The funkified force. Gonna get it. It's gonna get you. Power of soul." So good. Everything about this rules. I don't know how anybody could listen to it, not appreciate it for what it is.
I was gonna say, even if, like yourself in the past, you're just not a fan of the lyrical episodes, for this one,
oh, for sure.
Like, even if you don't like it in the other episodes, I feel like I know we've talked about it. It's worn you down over the years, and you're not so. You're a little bit more on board with it than you used to be. But even if you didn't like it at all, you hated it every time in every Static episode, I feel like it's so perfect. That Soul Power theme is so perfect for this episode and for everything it's sort of homaging and representing in this episode.
Yeah, for the feeling that you're going for and what you're trying to capture as the theme for this episode, having a theme song for your superhero from the 60s that fits and sounds like it's right out of a television show from the 60s, spot on. So for that reason, I had no choice but to give music a perfect 10 out of 10.
Wow, this is a really big moment, I feel like, for our show. Sure. The idea that when we started that you would ever give music a 10 in a Static episode, I think is
character growth.
Was not on the bingo card, so to speak. But yes, unsurprisingly, I have also given music a perfect 10 out of 10.
There you go. That is a first. Both of us giving music a 10 out of 10 for a Static episode. It's one for the history books. So. All right, Liam, let's move on to our fourth and final category of the day, which is going to be voice acting. So we've got a small but mighty cast to discuss this week of players here. So let's go ahead and talk about our voice actors and actresses, shall we?
That's right. We have a few of our regulars in some small roles. We hear Michelle Morgan a little bit at the start. She's kind of giving Virgil the business as he's trying to bail on the retirement home early on, and then we have Maria Canales Barrera briefly as the news reporter, Shelley Sandoval, and he's really just in the one scene. I don't even think he does any other like background voices, but Kevin Michael Richardson might steal the show in this. Not only, I mean, credit if we didn't talk about how funny the dance itself is that he does, the Soul Power dance when Virgil's dad does the dance is incredible, but he's just like giggling like the whole time, like he has this real like Virgil's dad in so many episodes is like the stern guy who's gonna teach you a lesson, and here he is just being a kid, being a nerd, and he's so excited to show Virgil this old video of Soul Power he has and do the dance with him and talk about how cool this guy was when he was a kid. Like he's such a joy, even just for the minute and a half or so he's in this episode.
Yeah, it's as you mentioned, he steals that scene. I love that Virgil is absolutely mortified that his dad is not only this gigantic fanboy of who he refers to as the Static of his day, but then polishes it off and puts the cherry on top with the most humiliating dad dance of all time. Just great.
Yeah, it's incredible. Great. Again, talk about maximizing your minutes. That's what Kevin Michael Richardson did this week. But elsewhere, playing the role of Sparky, aka Philip Rollins, we have Rodney Salisbury. No other DCAU or DC work to his name that I could see, but a regular on Bold and the Beautiful, one of those very long-running soap operas over the years, and also was the voice of Robbie Robertson on Spider-Man the Animated Series. So,
which is interesting because I thought he kind of resembles who's the Black Shield agent on Spider-Man. Do you remember? Or I think he's on the he's in Helping Hand Iron Fist.
Show. Yes.
Yeah. Whoever that guy is, he sort of resembles, like, the character itself sort of resembles him once he's got his Sparky outfit on. I kept getting, maybe it's the blue color palette with the gray hair and the kind of the flat top look, but
yeah, it's Gabriel Jones is that character.
That's right. Yeah.
But yes, definitely similar vibes there. But yeah, I like him. Like you say, he doesn't have a lot to do. It is very funny, like we said, when he's explaining that after he gave Soul Power and Static this lecture about how we have to play by the rules and we can't compromise our security like this, to find out he's like, yeah, he just pretended to be somebody else and we gave him everything. Like, it was so it's very understated, but it's a pretty funny scene as he's explaining the why of how Professor Menace got his hands on these ill-gotten gains. Speaking of Professor Menace, we have the great Terrence Stamp playing him. Folks would probably know him best as he is Zod in the first two Richard Donner, Chris Reeves Superman films. Of Kneel Before Zod fame. That movie is where that phrase comes from, as many times as it's been reused since. That is where it originated. Of course, he's also he's the guy who is in power just before Palpatine takes power in the Star Wars prequels as well. Chancellor Valorum. So Terrence Stamp, great. I love him. He's such a he's very over the top, but he's kind of like a Malcolm McDowell, I guess I would say, in that you can give him very over the top things to say, especially in this case where he's playing a 1940s by way of the 1960s supervillain, and he's just great. Like he's very campy and over the top, but it fits because of what he's supposed to be doing.
Yeah, absolutely. He's playing a mustache twirlingly bad villain, like, and every chance that he gets to shine is him delivering some sort of taunting video message to our heroes, for the most part, with the exception of our opening and closing scenes. But the opening scene sequence where we learn very quickly, for those with a watchful eye, that he's going to be the big baddie openly rooting against Soul Power, as we mentioned, is pretty funny. But yeah, he does his job very well, and I think it's certainly worth noting that he plays that over the top campiness to perfection, I'd say.
Absolutely. And then yeah, the reveal that he's the other guy in the nursing home is also, I think, is a pretty good bit at the end there as well there. I think he's a lot of fun there. And then voicing Soul Power himself, we have Brock Peters, a guy we've talked about a few times as the voice of Lucius Fox on the original Batman the Animated Series. Also in Star Trek and several other things. But yeah, let's cut to the chase here. He's incredible. Again, it's also one of those things when we talk about doing not a parody, but an homage to other eras of comics. We talk about this all the time when we as many episodes of Batman the Brave and the Bold as you cover, where the line between parody and homage can sometimes you can cross over and it feels like you're making fun of the older stuff. And here you never really get that sense, even with Mr. Peters' performance. Like he is playing that. We talked about a lot how much of the comedy in the old Adam West show comes from just playing it straight as you can, like playing the let the absurdity speak for itself, and you don't need a guy looking into the camera going, can you believe this? Can you believe his name's that? Even though Static is kind of that a little bit in this episode, but you have one character to kind of point out the wackiness, and then but Mr. Peters as Soul Power just as straight laced as they come. But as mentioned, he kind of has these little rants. He goes on about how kids today don't have the style that they had, and the women aren't as foxy and all this stuff. Like he's got he's got a little bit of that back in my day, cranky old timer voice when you first meet him. But then once he's back in the super suit, he's kind of just, like I said, just like plays it as straight as possible. And like with Adam West, that's where so much of the comedy and so much of the joy of a character like this comes from, is because there's not really a wink at the audience from him at any point, because he's playing it so straight.
Yeah, it's really, really good. I think when he gets the comment about the aforementioned comment about the name of Static's hideout, sort of clearly being goofy after Static has made fun of the name of the power pad, is really, really good. And just the way that he sort of is dejected initially, that he sort of failed to notice that it was going to be a trap, and so he has to play dejected, and then his old partner comes in and kind of gets his excitement back up to the point where he's ready to take on this old villain. And then the surprise, the surprise that he has at the end, that this is his fellow retirement home member, like all of that. Yeah, he's definitely playing it. He's definitely campy, but he's not playing it campy enough, as you mentioned. Like, he's not in on the joke. Like, it's deadly. All of this is deadly serious to him. And even though he's in his 60s or 70s, or we don't know how old he is, 70s, 80s year old superhero, this is all completely serious to him, even to the end of like hanging up and putting his uniform away, folded up into a drawer, and teaching Static the soul power dance. Yeah, it's all treated with 100% sincerity in the way that he delivers everything, and it's fantastic.
Absolutely. Yeah, he's just a joy. And of course, he is playing off, for most of this episode, playing off of the great Phil Lamar. I mean, another one of those actors. What more can be said? As many times as we've had to talk about him, either in this role or his role as Jon Stewart, or any of the other times he's popped up. But yeah, like I said, playing him opposite, playing this sort of more modern, wisecracking, quippy teenage, cool guy superhero against this very straight-laced, kind of a relic from the 60s. It's fun because in the moment at the start of the episodes where he's very incredulous, he doesn't want anything to do with them, he thinks it's lame, he thinks he's just going to get in his way, all of this stuff, to the point where when he kind of embraces the cheese, and they all, like I said, they all throw their fists up together and shout soul power together. Like, it's such that on paper could be so silly and so cheesy, but you're kind of like, you're ready to throw your fist up with them when it happens. It feels like so great and heroic of a moment, as they're kind of finally all on the same page. And Soul Power kind of has his moment where he's a little bit down and out, and he thinks maybe he is too old, but now they're all kind of rallying together, and they do this big war cry together, and then they explode out of the top of the lab. I think Phil Lamar and Brock Peters together in this episode, they're so interlinked because they're playing off of each other for so much of this episode. It's just great. It's like watching two elite tennis players just knock it back and forth for 22 minutes. It's a blast.
Yeah, it's almost shocking that these two hadn't had any prior like voice acting work together, unless they did, and we just didn't pick up on it, because the chemistry that they have is wonderful. It's a shame that it would probably cheapen the funness of this episode if they had done a follow-up, because it does feel very self-contained and very like the bow that they put on the end of it is nice, and obviously at this point, I believe we unfortunately lost Mr. Peters quite a while ago. But regardless, it's fun enough where it's like, yeah, this, I wish there was more, there was more of these two interacting on some sort of screen, because it was, yeah, it was a joy between their solo little commentaries, but most of it, obviously, it's working together on screen. So, yeah, a great performance by, I would say, everybody involved here, and led to me giving voice acting a very strong 9 out of 10. What about you?
Yeah, I went with another perfect 10 out of 10 for my voice acting score. I just think, yeah, Mr. Peters and Phil Lamar together, just really really unbeatable, along with some of those fun little bits, like we said, with Terrence Stamp as the super campy villain, and of course Kevin Michael Richardson as Virgil's dad. Really just tickled me. And then, yeah, the ending of Soul Power teaching him of Virgil asking him to teach him the dance as we fade to black is just a nice little icing on the cake moment for these two. Yeah, would have been cool to bring this character back, but I feel like you'd almost have to do the reverse if you did it. Well, either you have to like take Virgil out and it's like Soul Power and Gear team up for some reason, or you have to have, like, Static gets captured and Soul Power has to face like Static's villains now or something. I feel like you'd have to kind of reverse it at this point, because if it's just another one of his villains shows up, I mean, that would have probably been fine and a lot of fun, but it would have been probably felt like retread ground. So yeah, maybe that's our action item for the week. If you have another idea for how they could have incorporated Soul Power back into the show later on, let us know. You can hit us up at DCAU Review on the socials. But yeah, as it stands, just great job by our voice cast today. Just knocking it out of the park.
All right, Liam. So that will bring us to our final scores for the episode, and totaling everything up on my end, a very impressive, I think quite possibly either tied for our highest Static score to date, end up with a 37 out of 40. What about you?
Yeah, and for those of you counting along at home, you'll notice that even though we didn't agree in every category, we were just a point or two off. And so therefore, my final score ended up being the exact same, another 37 out of 40, which does push this into our top picks, our 36 or higher category for the real cream of the crop episodes of that we've reviewed on the show. This one is Hall of Famer, to say the least. There you go.
I'd say at that point, it feels like anytime we have a top pick, it's 2 thumbs up for rewatchability. I don't think there's any argument here.
Yeah.
While it's not in the grand scheme of things, DCAU doesn't play a big role in the overall DCAU. For this character, for this show, for the fun of it, for the enjoyment that we experienced, all of that. If you're picking out an episode to, hey, give me 3 episodes of Static Shock to watch, this would be in that 3 for sure, of the ones that we've reviewed thus far. Especially ones that don't necessarily rely on the guest star. Like, yes, Soul Power he's a guest star, I guess, technically, but he's created for the episode. So it's not a guest star episode that features Batman or Superman. And if somebody's asking, like, hey, are there episodes that I should watch of this that don't feature like a guest star? It's like, yeah, absolutely. Like, check out, Blast from the Past, not to be confused with Blasts from the Past, which is the Superman the Animated Series episode with Jack Sharmala. But I'd say this one pretty much is a slam dunk as far as rewatchability is concerned.
Yeah, slam dunk, great episode, which I think is an easy thumbs up for one. It feels like an episode that does matter to Static as a character, even though these characters don't come back. It feels like it's an episode where you see him grow, and then on top of it, yeah, it's one of the very best of the whole series. So if you get to one of the best episodes of the whole series, I think that has to go into your rewatch category if you're going back to Static Shock. So yeah, definitely 2 thumbs up easily for this one. Another character, Soul Power should have been in the Justice League.
Yeah, there you go.
And you know what? Although I will say, Professor Menace, I bet tried to get into the Legion of Doom, and they were just like, we got like 10 we tell like 10 scientists, we don't need another one. He's like, but wait, I have this weather machine. They're like, yeah, we have a guy. We have a guy who does that. He has a stick and it just does it. So
right.
We don't need your weird machine and your dumb robots. Sorry, man. Application rejected.
Oh man, too funny. All right, Liam. Well, that will put a bow on this week's episode. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. Don't forget, we would love your support for the podcast. Multiple different ways to do so. We invite you to do some of the free ways to do so, which include following us on social media at DCAU Review, both on Twitter/X and on Instagram. We're also on Threads. You can find us on Facebook, but we don't really interact with people on the latter. But the former two, we are much more frequenting and frequently interact with people on those platforms. So follow us on there. That's a free way to support us. You can also, of course, subscribe to us on your favorite podcast app, whether that's Apple Podcast or Spotify. Those, of course, the big two. Subscribe to us on there. Give us a 5-star review on those podcast platforms because they allow you to. I know Apple Podcasts allows you to also leave a little blurb about what you like about the podcast. Spotify just recently introduced the ability to comment on each episode. So leave a comment on our latest episode or whatever, and we'll do our best to engage and interact with you there. You can also, of course, vote in our weekly poll on our Spotify if you listen to us on there. And then, of course, you can also, of course, subscribe to us, as we mentioned, on the Pod Tower at youtube.com/the Pod Tower. If you like us there, like our videos, Liam's been working hard on posting new reels up there too, and on our socials. So if you like those, share those around. That helps us a lot.
Yeah. And also, just as an aside to that, Cal, if you hear something on the show that you think is funny and should be a reel, can you tell us? Because we have a habit of doing these shows and then forgetting everything we said as soon as we say it. So unless it's something really memorable, like when I called Mr. Freeze a pervert a couple of weeks ago, I would really appreciate if like something stands out of you as like a funny or poignant bit that you think would make for a good, 30-second to 1 minute clip. Please do let us know. I'll do all the rest of the work, but if you have a specific bit you like on the show, let us know. Because I think we as soon as we end the episode, sometimes it feels like I just we just talked for 90 minutes and I don't know what I said. So
gone from my brain.
Yep. So any help y'all could provide us as far as a content for those reels would be appreciated as well.
There you go. Absolutely. You can also check out the show notes. There's a pair of ways to support us there. You can become a monthly supporter, which we have several supporters that do give of their hard-earned dollars to support the podcast just because they love us so much and enjoy the pod. So you can join them by checking out the link in the show notes, or you can also check out the link to our store also in the show notes if you want to pick yourself up a piece of merchandise. And we thank you, those that do support us on a monthly basis and encourage us to keep putting out new content each and every week. It does indeed inspire us beyond the ability to just watch old cartoons and talk about them to each other. It lets us know that people appreciate it. So we appreciate those that appreciate us. And those of you who don't subscribe also and just listen, we appreciate that as well. Liam, we are continuing here in the month of July as we roll through. We have a final Saturday here in the month of July for one last review. What are we going to be talking about next week?
That is right, Cal. And next week we will, as mentioned, have basically run through all of the first 3 seasons of Static. We only have a few episodes of season 4 to go as far as original run reviews. And so next week we'll be looking at a very interesting episode, Yvonne returning to the scene, as well as a new group of Bang Babies we haven't seen before in the episode Army of Darkness.
Can't wait to check that one out with you. Going to be a blast. We love a good Yvonne episode, so should be fun to once again revisit my favorite villain of the Static Shock show. So until then, though, I'm Cal.
And I'm Liam.
We'll talk to you on the next episode of the DCAU Review.
Bye-bye.